Hello, in this video we're going to discuss what is a supply chain. A supply chain is a network of operations that control the flow of products, information, and cash among different players. These players have specific roles in building wealth by moving product from the manufacturing or the sources of the product to the final consumer. The manufacturers are involved in the supply chain by bringing their capacity and capabilities in terms of technology and transformation, and they have a strategic fit into the supply chain in terms of what are the requirements that they must have, for instance, the speed to respond or their capacity to innovate. Suppliers in general will facilitate the availability of product from the original sources, whether it's raw materials or parts, into the buildup of final products. These in these times with the globalization, these suppliers can be anywhere in the planet, and the product required different raw materials, in many cases new raw materials that are built, for instance, into tablets and cellular phones, in which locations that used to be not important in terms of manufacturing now are starting to become important, because only in selected places of the planet you can find these sources. It's important that these suppliers have reliability in terms of the delivery. It is important that they have an effective cost, and again, a strategic fit to the supply chain. Not because someone can deliver the product could necessarily have a good fit in terms of cost or the responsiveness for delivery. Of course, part of the need for one of the players in the supply chain are the transporters, and there are different modes. You have by land, by sea, by air. Depending on the nature of the product and depending on the nature of the supply chain, you would be willing to pay more or less for a faster or not as fast response. And so the fitness of these transporters must be adequate to the supply chain. An understanding of the cost, the fixed costs associated and the variable costs associated to the operation of the transporters is essential to determine the type of transportation. In the definition of the supply chain, we also have the warehouses, in which major roles or major decisions we need to make are the location of these warehouses, because it is important they are close to the center of operations, whether if it's a manufacturing site or close to the customer if we are willing to provide a better customer service. And there is always a trade-off between the number of warehouses and the type of customer service that we want to provide. And in recent years, with the coming of the business-to-business or business-to-customer e-commerce, the game has changed a lot, with many companies that are going out of business or reducing their sizes, Radio Shack or Borders bookstores. And these trade-offs are important considering the decisions on how to compete, and everybody's trying to offer a lower cost and a better service. The retailers, on their part, they're trying to offer these products to the final consumers, and here we have the depiction of the what we call the brick and mortar store or retailer, but as I mentioned just a moment ago, a lot of the operations now are changing into being done electronically. And still, the location of the retailer is important for some customers, but with the advent of the new technologies, the implementation of coordinated logistics systems and information systems is also a key factor in the success of retailers in the supply chain. And of course, the final player in the supply chain are the customers. In the customers, we need to understand that they prefer to be served in particular locations, and they have certain behavior in terms of when they buy what, or how do they trade in their mind alternatives between different products that may be seemingly not competitive. But at the end, manufacturers or retailers are trying to get the attention of the consumer to use their dollars into buying particular products. So in a way, you can consider, for instance, you can choose whether to buy a tablet or go on vacations, and those two products may seem not to be competing with our current understanding of the customer behavior due to the new technologies and the habits of purchase. We are starting to get a better understanding on these customer preferences. We need to understand the expectations of the customer, and we have to have adequate supply chains to consider the purchasing power of the customers. The objective of the supply chain is to maximize the supply chain surplus. That means the value that it's retained through the supply chain. For that, we can make an analysis of the supply and demand equilibrium. We have these, and these two axes, you can consider the vertical axis to be the price and the horizontal axis to be the quantity. If you sell a particular quantity, Q0 in this case, at the particular price, V of Q0, the multiplication of this number of units Q times the price will give you the total revenue or the total value of that market. That is the square in red in this image. The lines that are diagonal or with a slope, this one with a negative slope is the curve for the demand. And what this means is that depending on the price that it's found, the customer is willing to buy so many units, or the market is willing to buy so many units of that. So at higher prices, the quantity to be bought is very little. At lower prices, the quantity to be bought, the customer will be interested in buying more units. At the same time, this line here with a positive slope represent what is called the marginal cost for production. And what that means is that depending on how many units we need to produce, or we're willing to produce, the cost for producing that many units would increase. The essentially this line for the marginal cost represents these marginal costs with the current technology, with the current capacity, with the installed suppliers, or the current supply chain. In this case, this would be an analysis for the whole supply chain. So, of course, if we would improve the technology, then this slope or the position of this line would change. If we improve the technology, it might be possible that this line with the positive slope will be at a lower position. And if that's the case, then the price that customer is willing to buy will be reduced because suppliers can offer a reduced price, and the total number of units to be bought will be larger. With that, what happens is, if this is the line for the cost, the integral, or just the area under this particular line, could represent the total cost for manufacturing and selling and distributing this product through this supply chain. And since we have a revenue of all this much of the red square, that means that anything, or the area that is above this line but it's within the square, those are the profits for the supply chain distributors. Those would be the benefits for the warehouses, the manufacturers, the suppliers, and the transporters. The benefit for the consumer is represented in this big triangle above the square, and that represents what the customer was willing to pay for so many products and still didn't have to pay that much. It only had to pay this price for from the first product to the very last product that it was sold. So the benefit for the customer, the benefit for society by implementing this supply chain is represented by this triangle, and that is in economic theory understood as consumer surplus. So there you go. Those are the objectives of the supply chain explained in economical terms. And it is important to understand that the customer is the only source of revenue for the whole supply chain. So it is the only source for income for all the players through the supply chain. It is what he pays or he or she pays for the product that finally is distributed along the players in the supply chain. We have three different phases on the decision-making process of the supply chain. The first one, and more general, is the strategy, and this is a decision that is associated with the process of many years, and the commitment into these decisions lasts for very long. And this creates the structure of the supply chain. The decisions are associated to who to serve, where to serve, and how to serve these customers. We have the planning phase, in which we usually make decisions for 1 to 6 months of a planning horizon. And then we have the operational decisions, in which we make decisions day to day or week to week, up to a few weeks ahead maybe. And these are associated with very detailed decisions that take place in the supply chain. So if we go a little bit in detail into the strategic decisions, we have that we can make decisions about the locations of our facilities, or the type of product that we are going to be producing, or and where, and the information systems that we will have in place. It is very famous case that, for instance, Walmart has been able to grow thanks to the information systems that they have, because they constantly have information via satellite that collects what the sales were in each one of the stores, and sharing that information in the adequate channels with their suppliers, and therefore making a smoother operation in terms of not having stockouts and reducing the costs for operating a retail system like Walmart. For the process of planning, we have short-term policies implemented, and for that we need to understand what will be the forecast for the next few months, or maybe the whole year. And based on that, we can make decisions on when to build inventories, when to perform major operating maintenance, if we need to subcontract the operations that we have. We can anticipate what will be the labor headcount, therefore preparing our organization to have the training and the hiring process associated to the level of activity that will happen in the supply chain due to the forecast that is going to happen in the next few years. Of course, this is limited or constrained to what is already in place as structure, and that cannot be overcome. Finally, in terms of operations, in the day-to-day or week-to-week decisions, we have to each one of the customer orders, and for each one of the customer orders there is a series of activities that we need to do, including replenishment of inventory, tracking the order due dates, tracking the manufacturing schedules, tracking delivery schedules, and so on. It is a very minute and careful operations, and in many cases manual operations, when we have to mix or pick different products from the warehouse to deliver exactly what the customers are wanting. And there you go. That's a summary of what is a supply chain.